I woke up to the sound of rustling outside my window. At first, I thought it was just the wind, the kind of gentle, early morning breeze that rustles leaves and stirs the curtains. But then I heard it again, a distinct, deliberate sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the ground. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and peered through the blinds. What I saw made my stomach churn. There, in the dim light of dawn, was my neighbor, Margaret, clad in a ridiculous pink robe and matching slippers, hauling a bulging garbage bag across her yard. She moved with the casual confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. With a practiced motion, she heaved the bag over my 6-foot fence like she was pitching a softball. It landed with a sickening squish, bursting open on impact. Banana peels, coffee grounds, and what looked like last night's lasagna spilled out onto my property. I blinked, unable to process what I was seeing. My property wasn't a landfill. So why was Margaret treating it like one? Without thinking, I stormed outside, barefoot and still in my pajamas. The early morning air was crisp, but my rising temper burned hotter than the sun crawling over the horizon. There she was, Margaret, sipping her coffee like she hadn't just committed an act of environmental warfare. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing across the cul-de-sac. "You forgot something." Margaret paused mid-step, her back stiffening. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression one of feigned surprise. She took a dramatic sip of her coffee before sighing, as if I were the one inconveniencing her. "Oh, that?" she said, waving a lazy hand at the mess. It must have blown over in the wind. I looked at the oversized, double-knotted garbage bags still neatly stacked in the very spot she had flung them. "Blown over," I repeated, incredulous. "Really?" The wind managed to pick up 4 full bags of trash and toss them over my 6-foot fence. She shrugged, her face a mask of indifference. "You never know. Weather's unpredictable these days." I clenched my jaw, biting back the insults racing through my mind. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Margaret had been a thorn in my side ever since I moved into the neighborhood. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, constantly nitpicking about HOA rules while conveniently breaking every single one herself. She was rude, entitled, and completely insufferable. "You're cleaning this up," I said firmly, folding my arms across my chest. Margaret let out a theatrical laugh, the kind rich people do in movies when they're about to buy out a struggling business. "Oh, honey," she cooed. "Technically, that land is outside the HOA's jurisdiction. So even if I did put my trash there, which I didn't, by the way, it's not my problem." I stared at her, stunned. I had dealt with stubborn neighbors before, but Margaret took the crown. She wasn't just rude. She was entitled on a level I hadn't encountered in real life. It was like arguing with a villain from a soap opera. "I own that land," I countered, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. "And you're trespassing by dumping your garbage here." She smiled, completely unfazed. "Then move it." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked back inside, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, surrounded by the stench of her waste. That night, I installed security cameras. If Margaret thought she could get away with this, she had another thing coming. I was determined to catch her red-handed. Sure enough, at precisely 11:45 p.m., she emerged from her house like some kind of nocturnal raccoon, dragging another hefty bag behind her. The footage showed her looking over her shoulder before hurling the trash onto my property with the expertise of a seasoned shot-put athlete. Then she dusted off her hands and pranced back inside as if she had just done the world a favor. I watched the replay 3 times, my disbelief growing with each loop. Who does this? Who just decides that someone else's property is their personal dump site? And the worst part? She was acting like she'd never be caught, like she had immunity just because she wore designer sunglasses and ran the HOA like a medieval kingdom. The next morning, armed with the video evidence, I marched over to her house and pounded on her door. She answered with a slow, lazy smile, as if she had been expecting me. "Back so soon," she mused, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't even waste time with pleasantries. I pulled out my phone and played the footage. "Explain this," I demanded. She washed without a hint of shame, sipping her morning coffee like it was just another Tuesday. When the video ended, she pursed her lips, gave a little nod, and said, "That's some good footage. What kind of camera did you use?" I nearly dropped my phone. Are you serious? Margaret chuckled. Oh, lighten up. It's just a few bags of trash. What's the big deal? The big deal, I explained, my voice low and dangerous, is that you're treating my land like a dump. This is illegal. You can't just. She held up a manicured hand, silencing me with a condescending smile. Oh, sweetheart, I checked. As long as it's on your land, it's not an HOA issue. In the city? Well, they only care if it's a public health hazard, which it's not. She tilted her head, her smile widening. So technically, I can do this all I want. My blood boiled. You think you can just get away with this? She beamed. I know I can. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag those garbage bags right onto her pristine, flower-lined lawn and dump them on her front porch. But I knew that wouldn't work. She'd just find a way to twist it against me. No, if I was going to deal with Margaret, I needed to be smarter. I needed to hit her where it hurt. I spent the next few days trying to go through the proper channels, filing complaints, calling city officials, even bringing the footage to the HOA board. But everywhere I turned, Margaret had already beaten me to it. She had friends in high places, and she knew how to play the system like a grandmaster. The trash kept coming. Every morning, new bags would appear, piling up like an ever-growing monument to her audacity. One day it was just garbage. The next, it was an old, stained mattress. Then a broken toilet. I stood in my yard, staring at the junk heap that was once my beautiful open space, and I knew I couldn't let this stand. Margaret wanted to play dirty? Fine. I could play filthy. And I had the perfect idea. Because if she thought dumping garbage was bad, she had no idea what was coming. I sat on my porch, staring at the growing mountain of garbage on my land, breathing in the foul stench of Margaret's arrogance. The broken toilet sat there like a trophy to her shamelessness, and I could almost hear her smug voice in my head, reminding me that there was nothing I could do about it. Every attempt I had made to get the city involved had hit a dead end. The HOA wouldn't help. The local authorities shrugged it off as a civil dispute, and Margaret was reveling in her untouchable status. But that was the thing about people who think they're invincible. They always underestimate the patience of the person they're messing with. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted poetic justice. Margaret had chosen my land as her personal trash heap, so I would make sure hers became something far worse. It had to be something completely legal, yet utterly devastating. And then, in the most unlikely of places, inspiration struck. I was at the local feed store, picking up supplies for my garden, when I overheard two farmers joking about a neighbor who had crossed them. You ever want to keep someone off your land? One of them chuckled. Just cover it in manure. Ain't no one going to want to set foot there. The moment the words left his mouth, something clicked in my mind. Manure. It was legal. It was natural. And best of all, it was repulsive. I turned to the man, clearing my throat. How much manure are we talking about here? The farmer smirked, wiping his hands on his overalls. Depends. You need a few bags or a whole truckload? My grin widened. Oh, I need as much as you can get. A few calls later, I had arranged for multiple trucks to deliver fresh, pungent manure straight to Margaret's yard. Not just any manure. This was premium grade, straight from the farm, never been dried. Cow manure. The kind that seeps into the soil, clings to the air, and refuses to go away no matter how hard you try to clean it. The kind that would make sure Margaret's perfect little yard became a nightmare of her own making. The night before the delivery, I barely slept. I kept picturing her reaction, the way her face would twist in horror, the shrieks of outrage that would echo through the neighborhood. I wanted to be there when it happened. No, I needed to be there. So when the sun finally peeked over the horizon, I sat on my porch with my coffee, waiting for the show to begin. The first truck rumbled down the street at exactly 7 a.m., its heavy tires crunching against the pavement. The driver gave me a nod before pulling into Margaret's driveway. I could already see movement behind her curtains. She was waking up, probably preparing for another day of tormenting the neighborhood. But today, she was in for something special. The truck tilted back, and with a mighty roar, the manure began to pour. Thick, steaming piles of it cascaded onto her neatly manicured lawn, burying her prized flower beds, her white stone pathway, even the decorative fountain she had obnoxiously bragged about at every HOA meeting. By the time the second truck arrived, Margaret burst out of her front door, wrapped in a silk robe, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" she screeched, waving her arms as if she could physically stop the avalanche of filth. I took a slow sip of my coffee and called out, "Oh, that must have blown over in the wind." Her head snapped toward me so fast I thought she might get whiplash. "You did this," she spat, her voice teetering between rage and sheer horror. I leaned back in my chair, feigning innocence. "What? Me? No, no, Margaret. I just thought, since you like dumping things on my land, I'd return the favor. Sharing is caring, right?" She turned red, her hands shaking as she pointed at the manure pile, which was now creeping toward her front steps. "You can't do this. This is illegal. I'll have you arrested." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen a few times before showing her the confirmation email. "Actually, it's completely legal. Turns out, there's no law against fertilizing a yard. I even checked with the city. Manure is a natural soil enhancer. Some people would call this an improvement." Margaret let out a strangled noise, somewhere between a gasp and a growl. She turned to the truck driver, her nostrils flaring. "Stop. Stop right now. I'll sue you." The driver, completely unfazed, shrugged. "Sorry, lady. Customer already paid. And there's 2 more trucks on the way." That was the moment Margaret truly lost it. She stomped toward her house, but with her first step, her expensive slippers sank ankle-deep into the muck. She shrieked, flailing her arms to keep balance, only to step back with her other foot and sink even deeper. The sight was glorious. Neighbors started peeking out from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some of them, the ones who had suffered under Margaret's ridiculous HOA rules, began to smile. A few even pulled out their phones, capturing every second of her meltdown. "You'll regret this," she screamed, trying to yank her foot free from the manure. "I'll make your life hell." I smirked. "More than you already have? That's impressive." Margaret stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I leaned back, inhaling the crisp morning air. Well, as crisp as it could be, considering the overpowering stench of cow waste. But to me, it smelled like justice. By noon, Margaret had called the HOA, the city, and even the police. But when the officers arrived, they took one look at the paperwork, exchanged glances, and shrugged. "Sorry, ma'am," one of them said, clearly holding back laughter. "This is legal." She nearly combusted on the spot. But the smell? It's a public nuisance." The officer gave a sympathetic nod. "Yeah, I imagine it's pretty bad. But since he's just fertilizing the yard, there's nothing we can do." Margaret's face twisted in disbelief, her lips forming silent words as her brain scrambled for a response. But there was none. She was stuck. She had spent months lording over the neighborhood, dumping her trash wherever she pleased, assuming she was above the rules. And now? Now she was the one suffering. As the officers left, I walked up to my fence, taking in the view of her once pristine yard, now a wasteland of manure. "I'd get that cleaned up fast, Margaret," I said cheerfully. "Manure only gets worse when it sits in the sun." She let out a primal scream and slammed the door shut. I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in months, my land was trash-free. And better yet, Margaret had finally gotten exactly what she deserved. Margaret didn't come outside for the rest of the day. Her curtains stayed drawn, and for the first time since I moved in, her usual parade of HOA superiority was nowhere to be seen. But I knew she was inside, stewing in her own rage, plotting her next move. She wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. If anything, she was probably combing through city ordinances, desperate to find some loophole to use against me. I wasn't worried. I had done my homework. And as much as she wanted to believe otherwise, she wasn't untouchable. The next morning, I was greeted by the sight of a professional cleanup crew in hazmat suits standing in Margaret's yard, staring at the catastrophe before them like soldiers about to charge into battle. Their truck, equipped with high-powered hoses and industrial-strength deodorizer, looked promising. But I knew better. Manure wasn't just something you could wash away. It had soaked into the soil, into the cracks of her walkway, into every single fiber of her expensive outdoor furniture. No amount of scrubbing was going to make her yard smell normal again anytime soon. Margaret came outside, looking more put together than she had any right to after yesterday's disaster. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, the kind celebrities wear to hide puffy, stress-induced bags under their eyes, and a sleek black tracksuit that screamed money. But the way she stomped across her ruined yard gave her away. She was livid. The cleanup crew hesitated before getting to work, probably because every step they took released another wave of unbearable stench. I sipped my coffee, enjoying the sight of Margaret barking orders while standing on what was essentially a field of raw sewage. She caught me watching and snapped her sunglasses down just enough to glare at me. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Oh, I know," I said, smiling. "I'm looking forward to round two." Her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. She turned sharply on her heel and stormed back inside, slamming the door. It didn't take long for Margaret to launch her counterattack. That afternoon, I received a notice from the city claiming that the manure was a public health hazard and needed to be removed immediately. I had been expecting this. What I hadn't expected was the sheer speed at which Margaret managed to pull strings. Normally, complaints like these took weeks to process, but somehow, she had managed to fast-track mine overnight. I wasn't deterred. I had made sure everything was done legally, and I was more than ready to fight back. I gathered every receipt, every confirmation email, and every city guideline I had followed. Then I marched down to City Hall and handed over my meticulously documented case. The clerk at the front desk raised an eyebrow as they scanned the paperwork. "You really went all out with this, huh?" they said. I grinned. "You have no idea." 2 days later, I received another notice, this time stating that my use of manure was within legal bounds. In other words, the city couldn't force me to remove it. Margaret had tried to play dirty, and for once, it had backfired. I wondered how she would react when she got the news. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, she stomped up to my house and pounded on my door so hard I thought it might crack in half. I opened it slowly, savoring the moment. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat, her face red with fury. "I'd say resourceful," I corrected. She was shaking, barely holding herself together. "I will find a way to get back at you." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "You know, Margaret, you could just stop. Clean up your yard, move on, and accept that maybe, just maybe, you finally messed with the wrong person." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You think you've won? Oh, you have no idea what I'm capable of." I raised an eyebrow. "Neither do you." The next day, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Normally, these meetings were reserved for minor disputes, fence height violations, paint color disagreements, the occasional issue with unapproved lawn ornaments. But this time, the entire neighborhood had been summoned. Margaret sat at the front of the room, looking smug despite the fact that she still smelled faintly of manure. She cleared her throat dramatically and began. "We are here today to address the egregious violation that has taken place within our community. A certain resident," she shot a pointed look in my direction, "has deliberately created an unlivable environment, jeopardizing property values and the overall aesthetic of our neighborhood." I could hear people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them, the ones who had been burned by Margaret's petty rule enforcement in the past, looked unimpressed. Others, the ones who still feared her HOA wrath, seemed unsure of which side to take. I stood up. "Funny," I said, my voice calm, "because last time I checked, the only person lowering property values was the one dumping their garbage all over someone else's land." A few people murmured in agreement. Margaret's eye twitched, but she quickly recovered. "That was a misunderstanding." "Was it?" I pulled out my phone and played the security footage of her tossing bags of trash onto my property. The room fell silent. Margaret's face turned an impressive shade of purple. Someone in the back snorted. "Wow. So that's the misunderstanding, huh?" Margaret glared at them. "That's irrelevant. The point is, this disgusting stunt with the manure has made our community unlivable." A voice from the front row, an older man who had been dealing with Margaret's HOA tyranny for years, spoke up. "And what about all the fines you've issued for no reason? The constant complaints? The way you treat everyone like they're beneath you?" More voices joined in. "Yeah, what about the ridiculous rule about Christmas lights? What about the time you tried to ban kids from playing outside?" Margaret's confidence began to waver. The HOA president, who had always been something of a pushover, finally spoke up. "Margaret, I think we need to have a discussion about your position on the board." Her mouth fell open. "What? No, you can't." "We can," he interrupted. "And we are. Effective immediately, you are no longer part of the HOA." The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret's face twisted in rage, but there was nothing she could do. For the first time, she wasn't in. Margaret stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Over the next few weeks, she tried everything she could to fight back, but her power was gone. Without her HOA influence, she was just another neighbor, one who now had a reputation for being the cause of the worst-smelling incident in the neighborhood's history. The cleanup of her yard took weeks, cost her thousands, and from what I heard, never truly got rid of the smell. 3 months later, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house. I stood on my porch, watching as a moving truck backed into her driveway. As she loaded the last of her boxes, she caught sight of me. I lifted my coffee in a silent toast. She turned away without a word, got into her car, and drove off. I took a deep breath, enjoying the crisp morning air, now free from both the stench of manure and the toxic presence of Margaret. For the first time since I moved in, the neighborhood felt peaceful. And best of all, my land was finally mine again. Margaret's house sold quickly, though not for the price she had hoped. The new neighbors were a young couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They were friendly, respectful, and, most importantly, they didn't dump their trash on my property. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson from the whole ordeal. Sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully isn't to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, all it takes is a little creativity and a whole lot of manure. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.